We spent a couple of evenings in 2 John. 3 John seems to be a companion epistle. Very brief letter, just 14 verses. The elder unto the well-beloved Gaius, whom I love in the truth. Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth. For I rejoiced greatly when the brethren came and testified of the truth that is in thee, even as thou walkest in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. Beloved, thou doest faithfully whatsoever thou doest to the brethren and to strangers, which have borne witness of thy charity before the church, whom, if thou bring forward on their journey after a godly sort, thou shalt do well. Because that for his name's sake they went forth, taking nothing of the Gentiles. We therefore ought to receive such that we might be fellow helpers to the truth. I wrote unto the church, but Demetrius, who loveth to have the preeminence among them, receiveth us not. Wherefore, if I come, I will remember his deeds which he doeth, prating against us with malicious words, and not content therewith, neither doth he himself receive the brethren, and forbiddeth them that would, and casteth them out of the church. Beloved, follow not that which is evil, but that which is good. He that doeth good is of God, but he that doeth evil hath not seen God. Demetrius hath good report of all men, and of the truth itself. Yea, and we also bear record, and ye know that our record is true. I had many things to write, but I will not with ink and pen write unto thee. But I trust I shall shortly see thee, and we shall speak face to face. Peace be to thee. Our friends salute thee. Greet the friends by name. You will notice that there are 3 men that are called out by name in this letter. It's the only epistle in which John names somebody by name. In verse number 1, he mentions a man named Gaius. In verse number 9, he mentions a man named Demetrius. And in verse number 12, there is Demetrius. And so the letter centers around or focuses on those 3 men in the church. Like the letter to 2 John, there was probably a house church somewhere that John had connections to. We don't know how, we don't know where, we don't know when. It is possible that it is the same church that the lady in 2 John belonged to. Possible that they both belonged to the same church. But we gather from these verses that John had written a letter previously to the church. And an influential man named Demetrius had refused to receive the letter or let it be read in the church. You find that in verse number 9. So John had sent some messengers to the church to see how the church was doing. But this same Demetrius had stepped in again, and he had refused to acknowledge them or allow them any word in the church. You find that in verse number 10. Not only that, but Demetrius has spread rumors about the Apostle John. And he has threatened to excommunicate, to kick out any members of the church who would receive the brethren that John had sent. But there's one man in the church named Gaius who will not bow to Demetrius. He's the recipient of this letter. He receives the men that John sent. He cares for them while they are there. He has a good testimony in the church. And so the men, it seems like, come back to the Apostle John. They give a report on what is happening there. And now John writes this letter back to Gaius, thanking him for his hospitality and for his encouragement to those men, and encouraging him to stand strong against Demetrius. Now in every church there must be Gaius. And there's probably a Demetrius. I would not be so cynical as to say that there is a Demetrius in every church. But many churches across the land have had great damage done to them by the hand of a Demetrius. And the tendency in a sermon like this is for everybody to look around and see if you can spot Demetrius. Surely by the end of the night you will know who is Gaius, who is Demetrius, and who is Demetrius, and we'll have them all marked. But the intent tonight is not to identify if there is a Diotrephes in our midst. No, the intent tonight is to identify if there is any Diotrephes in you. That's what we're doing tonight, to see if the spirit of Diotrephes is in me, to see if he's in you, and to identify who you are. You. I'm not worried about who your neighbor be. I'm worried about who you are. Are you part of the problem or are you part of the solution? We'll find out tonight. Now there's three men in this book. First of all, I want you to notice there's a man named Gaius. He is the man who helps God's work. Verse 1, the elder unto the well-beloved Gaius, whom I love in the truth. There are at least three other men in the New Testament named Gaius. I don't believe that this Gaius was any of those three. Gaius was a very common name in the Roman Empire. It'd be kind of like having three Johns or three Jameses in the church. I don't know that he's a preacher. I don't know that he's an elder. I don't know that he's a deacon. Maybe just a layman, but he's a good man that every church needs. And there are several things that John says about him. He says, first of all, that he is a well-beloved man. Well-beloved Gaius. Everybody loves him. He's got a good testimony in the church. He's a good witness to his own brothers and sisters. In verse number 3, John says that the brethren testified of the truth that is in thee. That was their testimony of him. In verse number 6, he says they have borne witness of thy charity. So their witness, their testimony, this is a man with a good testimony. And brethren, can I tell you tonight that you have a testimony within the church. You have earned a witness. You have earned a record. You have earned a testimony, whether good or bad, amongst your own people. I have great respect for many men. Most of the men in our church, I have great concern for some. Some are leaders, some are followers. Some are givers, some are takers. Some are loyal, some are not so much. So what is your testimony amongst the church? Well-beloved Gaius. When we consider our testimony, we usually think of in terms of what our testimony is to our lost friends. Can they see Jesus in me? But I want you to consider, what is your witness within this building? Does your fellow churchgoer have confidence in you, or do they know that you're not a spiritual person? Somebody help me out tonight a little bit, all right? So he's got a good testimony. And then in verse number 2, he is spiritually healthy. John says, beloved, I wished above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth. Now there is a hint that Gaius may have some poor health. Because John says, I wish that you would be in health. So I'm reading into that maybe Gaius has a physical ailment, maybe some kind like that. But even if he is physically sick, he is spiritually healthy. He's doing better spiritually in soul and spirit than he is doing physically in body. Probably 90% of our prayer requests are physical in nature. I understand when there are physical problems, and that's keen on our mind, but I wonder if that's not backwards, if 90% of our prayer requests ought to be spiritual in nature. Now here's what's interesting to me about how John phrases this. He says, I wish that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospers. Here's what he's saying. I'm praying that your physical health would be as good as your spiritual health. As healthy as you are spiritually, that's how I wish you to be physically. Well, I wonder if you would be okay with that. Would you be okay if we all prayed that God would make you as healthy as you are spiritual? I mean, would you like for your physical condition to match your spiritual condition? Huh? If God just said, this week you weren't very spiritual, so next week you're not going to be very healthy. Huh? I don't know that I want to strike that bargain. He's spiritually healthy. In verse number 6, he is hospitable, which have borne witness of thy charity before the church, whom if thou bring forward on their journey after a godly sort, thou shalt do well. We mentioned the protocol in 2 John, how that traveling preachers often stayed in the home of church members. Inns were notorious places of debauchery. It wasn't a place that a preacher would want to stay. So when visitors came from out of town, someone had to host them in their home, and Gaius was quick to do that. Gaius had the gift of hospitality. I don't know when's the last time I've heard a message on hospitality. But I was reading over in 1 Timothy 3 yesterday, those qualifications of a bishop. And if a man desire the office of a bishop, he must be blameless, husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, given to hospitality, apt to teach. 1 Peter 4 says that we ought to use hospitality one to another without grudging. So hospitality is an important thing. In fact, in Matthew chapter 25 and verse number 40, Jesus teaches that when you show hospitality to your brother, it's as if you are doing it to him. Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done this to one of the least of my brethren, then you have done it unto me. Hospitality is ministering to the needs of others, and Christ takes it personally when you do that or you don't do it. And so what Gaius has done, Gaius has opened his heart, but he also has opened his home. When someone was sick, he went to the hospital to visit him. And he may not have even been the preacher. When a man was down in health, he was the guy that got his lawnmower, went over and cut the grass. Amen. So help me out a little bit tonight, all right? He's the guy that was always trying to pick up the tab for lunch. Yeah. And by the way, it's not just having people over for dinner. He has his eyes open to the needs of others. He's a hospitable man. Our lives, Fellure household has gotten busy, and we have very few evenings home by ourselves. And I recognized the other day, we haven't had a lot of people in our home for a while. We used to do that a lot. And we haven't had a lot of people. And I got to thinking, boy, we've got a lot of folks that I've never even had over our home for a meal and for fellowship. And we enjoy that. If they don't stay too late, we enjoy that. And so, I said, man, we ought to set a goal to have every member in our church over our house, not at the same time. Every member of the church over, and I'll cook you a hot dog and we'll eat and fellowship and have a good time. Given to hamburger, whatever you like. Given to hospitality. So here's a man, he's got a good testimony. He's given to hospitality. Then he's generous, verse 6, which have borne witness of thy charity before the church. That's such a simple thing. But Gaius is known as a giving kind of man. And by the way, giving has nothing to do with your wealth or your lack of wealth. But whatever he had, he held it with an open hand. Giving is not about how much money you have. Giving is about how big your heart is. And if you have a heart to be a giver, you'll find a way to give. I tell you, looking into the future of Victory Church, if there's anything that I could do with our young men that are going to marry and have their own families, if I could somehow cultivate into them the heart of a giver, to be quick to give. Some men, it's just triggered in their mind. They're always scheming of a way to get another dollar and always looking. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've got my hand in several ventures all the time. But to be quick to give that dollar as well. Listen. If you'll give it in His name, it'll come back to you. Or to take care of you. This past week, I heard about a preacher friend of mine that is having some physical problems and having some financial hardships, and we're trying to raise money for him. And so I sent a check for $500 just to try to be a blessing to him. And I don't know if he's got any money or not, but he's got that. And listen, I won't lose that money. Listen, the blessing of giving is greater value than the value of that check. And I say this as a challenge to our church, how that we need to grow in our giving. Born witness of thy charity. So here's a good man. He helps the church. He's got a good testimony. He's spiritually healthy. He's hospitable. He's generous. And when I read this, I thought, boy, we're blessed to have those kind of men in our church. I'd start naming you, but I'd forget somebody, and I don't want to do that. But I think the Victory Baptist Church has as strong a caliber of men as any church that I know, and that's a blessing to a church. So here's a man who helps God's work. But then in verse number 9, here's Diotrephes, a man who hindered God's work. The letter is written to Gaius, but it's about Diotrephes. He's power hungry. He's a troublemaker. Boy, one such man can do a lot of damage. Notice his attitude in verse 9. I wrote unto the church, but Diotrephes, who loveth to have the preeminence among them, receiveth us not. He wanted to have authority. He wanted to be noticed. He wanted you to ask his opinion. He wanted to have his say. He has to have a word in everything. He's the expert. He's God's gift to the church. Now listen, some men are like that because they have preeminence everywhere else. I've noticed sometimes that when men have power and prestige outside of the church, when they come in the church, they think they should have the same power and prestige. And they're used to being the boss everywhere that they are, and then it's hard to become a servant when you come into the church. Whatever status they have outside the church, they think they should have the same status inside the church. But then I have noticed that there are men who love to have preeminence in the church because they don't have any preeminence outside the church. They have failed to earn any recognition or any prestige or any position or any authority. So they come inside the church, and if they can get a little bit inside the church, it feeds their ego, which is why it is always a mystery to me why henpecked husbands can be so opinionated in church business. Well, they're taught it's because they can't be opinionated at home. It's as if his wife won't let him have a say in the house, so he's going to get it in the church. Diotrephes, he's a proud, egotistical man in the assembly. I don't know his circumstances, I don't know his position, but he's great in his own eyes. His great sin is pride. He's the kind of guy who will always voice his opinion. He's the kind of member who finds the other disgruntled member and feeds his discontent. If you don't notice him, if you don't recognize him, if you take away his position, he will get offended. Amen. And he doesn't come to work day, but he wants to teach a Sunday school class because he's not interested in working, he's interested in a platform. That's Diotrephes. Look at Matthew chapter 20. Matthew chapter 20. Matthew chapter 20, Jesus speaking, verse 25. Jesus called them unto him and said, Ye know that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them. They that are great exercise authority upon them. But it shall not be so among you. But whosoever will be great among you, let him be your minister. Whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant. The path to greatness in the kingdom of God is through servitude. There are no big I's and little U's in the church and in the secular world. You advance by being good and by being great and pushing yourself and promoting yourself and asserting yourself. But in the church, you are great when you serve others. The phrase servant leadership has been coined in the last, 20 or 30 years. That's the essence of what church leadership is about, servant leadership. Now notice what John says about this man, Diotrephes, in verse number 9. He says, I wrote unto the church, Diotrephes, who loveth to have the preeminence among them, receiveth us not. Perhaps in some meeting, Diotrephes has stood up. He's addressed the men. He has let it be known that he does not support John as an apostle. And I doubt that he tried to question his apostleship because that's pretty established. But he disagrees with how John handled a situation or how John did this or something that John had preached. John is the last living apostle. He's the last apostle on earth that actually walked with the Lord Jesus Christ. But John is a threat to his power, and he doesn't care what he has to say, whether it's true or false. He is going to destroy John's influence in the church. He receiveth us not. In verse number 10, wherefore if I come, I remember his deeds which he doeth, prating against us with malicious words. It is always characteristic of Diotrephes to falsely accuse other people. They gain trust not by the virtue of their own life, but by destroying people's trust in other men. False, foolish, unfounded, contrived, manipulated accusations that tear down the testimony of a good man, but truth is not part of his agenda. It says in verse 9 also, not content therewith, neither doth he himself receive the brethren. The brethren that I sent to you, he feels threatened by them. And so he's going to make sure that he tears them down too. Anybody, anyone who is perceived as a threat to his little throne. Verse number 10, the last part. Neither doth he himself receive the brethren, and forbiddeth them that would, and casteth them out of the church. Even when the Apostle John has sent other men in to check on the church, Diotrephes flexes his muscles and he threatens any church member who would receive him. If you bring him into your house, we're going to church you. Sounds like somebody lording over God's heritage, doesn't it? By the way, it'd be a good place right here to just talk about church discipline. God places a man over a church as pastor, and leadership flows through that man. And some churches are board run, some churches are pastor led. That's this one. And then you have some pastors who are dictatorial and pretty hard and overbearing in their leadership style. Everybody has a different style. I tend to think that those are insecure men or egotistical men, one or the other. But a pastor should have free reign to pastor the church and not have to ask for every $3 he's got to spend. But it doesn't mean he has to be an ogre and just push his weight around and act like this is his little empire. And then there's the matter of church discipline. Diotrephes is threatening to put people out of the church for siding with John. If you don't toe the line, exactly like he says, you're out of there. Now, there is a biblical principle of church discipline. We've had to exercise that here a number of times. It's always a sad thing when we have to dismiss somebody from the church. But this man's causing division. This man's causing division is what he's doing. And I'm telling you, division is going to destroy this church if they don't get him out of here. 1 Corinthians 5, Paul told the church at Corinth, you need to excommunicate that man that's committing adultery. Immorality is a reason to say, you can't be a member of this church anymore. Over there in 1 Timothy 1, Paul talks about those who teach false doctrine and says you need to turn them over to Satan that they might learn not to blaspheme. So church discipline is proper. It is proper. It is necessary. Diotrephes is using this as a power play, however. And so the Bible warns against Diotrephes. It starts with arrogance. He loves to have the preeminence, and arrogance breeds ambition, and ambition produces accusation, and accusation leads to assassination of character. So you have Gaius, you have a man who is helping God's word. You have Diotrephes, a man who hinders God's word. Notice John's approach to him in verse number 10. He says, wherefore if I come, I will remember his deed, which he doeth. In other words, John says, I know what you're saying. I'm not going to forget it. I'm going to expose you. I am letting the church know what you have done. Slandering, gossip, and false. Y'all so nervous because you don't know where I'm headed, are you? Huh? Loosen up a little bit, huh? Slander and false gossip and rumor, it is not going to be swept under the rug. And brethren, it's a sad, listen to me, it's a sad day when you have to stand before a congregation and you have to expose sin. It's a sad day when you have to break fellowship with somebody that's causing division. But I'm going to tell you something, you better have the intestinal fortitude to do that or it's going to destroy the church. Churches in Paraguay are dealing with this right now. And the longer it goes on, the more damage it's going to do. Sometimes you have to do that. You don't have to be nasty and rude. Well, there are some people you should break fellowship with. There are some people I do not take their phone call. I have taken them off of caller ID. I don't answer the phone if I don't recognize the number. They leave me messages. I do not return the message. There's a number. We're not in fellowship. About a year ago, a man walked in here with his family, going to come to church on a Sunday morning, and I happen to know he's caused trouble in more churches in this county than any man I know. I met him out there for you. I didn't recognize him. He told me his name, and I recognized him, and I said, you can stay for the service. Don't come back for another. Make this one your last one. This ain't for you. Ain't for you. It doesn't cause problems at West Florida. It caused problems at Trinity. We've had our share, not from you. So he went and wrote a big Google review and all, and you can go read it. Bless him. Matter to me? Rather have that than have him sitting in the pew. He says in verse number 11, beloved, follow not that which is evil, but that which is good. Two men in the church. Gaius is good and Demetrius is evil. You let these good men lead you and follow them. There's always strong personalities in the church, and simple people just follow the personality. And a man with a strong personality can always get a little following behind him. But don't just follow the vocal man. Don't just follow the opinionated man. You find you a spiritual man like Gaius and you follow him. You know what I've learned in church business? Learned a few things. I've learned that most church problems is not over doctrine. It's not. It's over personalities. Power struggle, a clash over something that was done or how it was done. That is the spirit of Diotrephes. And by the way, I'm preaching this tonight because I don't know that we have a Diotrephes in our church. I really don't. And thank God for that. But the admonition tonight is not to look around and see who Diotrephes is. The admonition tonight is to look inside and see if there is any of the spirit of Diotrephes in me. Because I'm going to tell you, it is natural to want to have preeminence, to want to be noticed, to be appreciated, and to have your opinion evaluated. But the Christ-like is to make yourself of no reputation, to serve in humility. So Gaius, a man who helped God's work. There is Diotrephes, a man who hindered God's work. There's a third man in verse 12, Demetrius, the man who was honored in God's work. Demetrius has good report of all men and of the truth itself. Yeah, and we also bear record, and you know that our record is true. In fact, back up to verse 11. Watch this. Beloved, follow not that which is evil, but that which is good. He that doeth good is of God, but he that doeth evil hath not seen God. Demetrius. It's almost as if he's saying that if you want a role model in your church, here's your guy. Diotrephes is evil, don't follow him. Demetrius is good, follow him. There's no introduction to Demetrius. We know absolutely nothing about him. The church knew who he was. There's other Demetriuses in the Bible. I have no reason to believe that he is one of those other men. May have been a member of the church. He may have been one of the emissaries that John sent to the church to check on it. We simply don't know. But here's the one thing I know about him. He has a good report. One of the qualifications of a bishop is that he must have a good report of those that are without. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have any critics. I don't know if it's possible to live and not have any critics. But a blameless life. Pay your bills. Do what you said. Be honest. And if you blow your testimony, you can't hold that position. Most of you never met him, but the man that started this church, Tom Woodward, that man had a good report. I'm forgetting the last name, Dennis Morris. That man had a good report. Well, Alan Stewart just resigned last year over at West Florida Baptist. That man had a good report. And John is setting Demetrius forth as an example to the church. He's got a good report. He's the kind of man that you ought to follow. And Diotrephes, he's the man to avoid. And Demetrius, he's the man to emulate. It's human nature to follow by example. It really is. Every young person finds someone that pleases their character, and they try in some degree to be like that person. One writer said that man is a creature that is led by patterns more than precepts. It's the reason why you ought to be so guarded in who your kids are around, because they're going to try to be like that person, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. In fact, that feeds a little bit into my philosophy of youth work. When you're looking for somebody to work with your youth, I'm not looking for somebody that's the most dynamic, the guy that can do the most tricks. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for somebody that I can put in front of my kids and say, be like that person. Brother Jimmy Jackson came out and he went into the singles class, and Brother Eric stepped aside from the youth, and we brought Brother Aaron and Sister Taylor Francis into the youth program as the youth pastor. And basically what I'm saying when I set that young couple in front of those kids is I'm saying, hey, I want you to be like them. Be like them. And so we needed another couple to come in and to help them teach. And two couples run in there. And so I'm looking around, and there's a lot of people that we can name. But I said, boy, who would I want our kids to be like? And so I asked Mies and Darlene Oliveda. I said, I want you to go in that class. And now they're in that teen class, and they're helping, because I want to set them in front of those teenagers and say, hey, you be like them. And if all the girls in our church would model themselves after Taylor Francis and Darlene Oliveda, hey, we're doing good right there. And if all of y'all young men would model themselves after Aaron and after Misa Oliveda, oh, we're doing good right there. And a bunch of others of you. Please understand, all right? A lot of others of you. But it's not that I need somebody that can blow up balloons and do tricks and be crazy and all that. No, I'm trying, because I know they're going to follow somebody. So follow them. Follow them. So here's the question tonight. Do you have a life worth emulating? And why would you emulate Demetrius? Here's why: because he knew God. He that doeth good is of God. So find somebody that knows God. Find somebody that walks with God. And be like them. You may know the name Alfred Nobel. He was born and lived in Sweden during the 1800s. He was a chemist. He was an inventor. Held 365 patents. The one he's most famous for is dynamite. Alfred Nobel invented dynamite. He owned a company that produced iron and steel. And when he bought the company, he changed the business model, so they started producing cannons and different arms and weapons of war, and of course dynamite. And he made a fortune manufacturing and selling weapons of war. And what changed his life one day was he woke up, picked up the newspaper, and read his obituary in the newspaper. It was a journalistic mistake. His brother had died, and the newspaper had gotten it wrong, and they thought he had died. And they wrote his obituary, and he woke up, and he read his obituary in the paper. And he was shocked at what he read, because for the first time he saw himself as the world saw him, the manufacturer of weapons of war. They called him the dynamite king. He got rich off of explosives, and as far as the public was concerned, his entire life was to be a merchant of death. He decided that's not how he wanted to be known. So he made a last will and testament to dispose of his fortune to people who made peace. And he stated that every year that a certain portion of his wealth would be given that year to the person who had done the most to promote peace. And they called the prize the Nobel Peace Prize. Now we know it's highly politicized now, but that's how it started. And the challenge is, if you woke up tomorrow and read your obituary in the paper, would it say anything about how you helped the work of God? Or would it be all about your work, your hobbies, the organizations you were a member of, your fortunes? Or would there be anything in there, how you helped send missionaries to the field, how you taught a Sunday school class, You run a bus route, anything in there concerning the work of God. When all is said and done, what will your life be known for? Gaius helped God's work. Diotrephes hindered God's work. Demetrius honored in God's work. Which one are you? Our Heavenly Father, we thank you tonight for this little brief letter, the example of these three men. And I thank you that in our church, Lord, we've got young people, older men, ladies. Oh, there's such helpers. Contribute so much. Grateful for it. And I don't know tonight that we have any Diotrephes in our midst, and I'm grateful for that. But I don't want to have the spirit of Diotrephes in my heart. And so I pray that you'd help us tonight. Help us, Lord, to have a time of inward reflection. Who am I? Which one am I like? Is my life worth emulating? Would it be okay if my physical health matched my spiritual health? Speak to hearts tonight. Several have come to the altar. If you need to come, don't linger. Just come. Lord, you help me. Help me to be that man that strengthens the things that remain. To be that role model to these young people. That's the future. That's the strength of our church. Would you come tonight? Help me to be that Gaius. That man of good report, hospitable, generous, giving, well-beloved.